I was the last guy standing under the arrival sign at Gate 3A. My coat was folded up on one arm, and my pie dish was still warm, wrapped tight in a couple of layers of aluminum foil. All around me, people were laughing, hugging, crying, grabbing their loved ones just like you'd grab your bag off the baggage claim conveyor. And me? I was a big old question mark on the edge of all that happiness. No phone call, no text message, just dead air. I checked my phone again. It had been 42 minutes since my flight touched down. My son, he told me, "Come on out, Dad. The kids really miss you. It just won't be the same without you." And here I was, all by myself, watching a whole bunch of strangers who were clearly wanted. I made a point not to sit down. That was on purpose. I just kept standing there, because if I had sat down, it would have been for real. It would have told every family walking by, every kid crying, every beaming dad holding a balloon, this guy is waiting for someone who's never going to show up. So I stood my ground. My coat, still just hanging there on my forearm, had started to feel heavier than it had any right to be. The pie dish was still warm from when I'd baked it. It was a pecan pie, which was Greta's favorite. I'd wrapped it up snug in 2 layers of foil, then in a dish towel to make sure it wouldn't get all messed up in my bag. I even made the crust a little darker, just the way Hans used to like it when he was a boy. I stopped for a second just to think about that. It's crazy, the little things we remember about people who've completely forgotten that we remember them. The phone was still in my hand, the screen completely blank. I tapped it again. No notifications, no missed calls. I'd sent a message the night before, telling them I'd be landing at 3:10. "Can't wait to see you all," I'd written. I never got a reply, but I just figured they were busy. Everyone's always busy. I used to be like that, too, before I retired and my schedule went from urgent to empty. Now, I mark my days by coffee spoons and when I need to get my next prescription filled. But this invitation, this one felt like I had a pulse again, something to get ready for, a reason to be included. Just 3 days before, Hans had called me out of the blue. "Hey, Dad," he said, and his voice was light but strained, kind of like he was trying to hide something he didn't want to say. I had been planning to just stay home, maybe cook a small chicken and read those old war letters again. "Maybe not," he said. "We'd love to have you here this year. Greta misses you. The kids do too. It won't be the same without you." That last part, that "it won't be the same without you," that's what got to me. When you get to my age, folks stop asking you to things. You either get invited out of obligation or you just get left off the list entirely. But in that moment, those words made me feel like I mattered again. I didn't even ask if they were going to pay for the flight. I just said I'd be there. I booked it that very same night. The ticket was non-refundable. I used the Christmas money I'd stashed in an envelope way in the back of my junk drawer. I started packing 3 days early, bought some new socks, and picked out a cardigan I hadn't worn since Helga's funeral. It was navy blue with ribbed cuffs and 2 inside pockets. I even wrote their address down on a piece of paper, just in case my phone went dead. I wanted to be the guy they expected, the one who belonged in their house. The kind of grandpa who smells like pine and baked sugar, who gets invited because he's important to them, not just because someone feels bad. I looked around the place again. A woman next to me was crying on her daughter's shoulder. A teenage boy ran into his grandfather's arms, almost knocking him flat on his back. The whole airport was full of the sound of people finding their way home. I stood up a little straighter, trying my best not to look like a guy who'd been forgotten. And then I saw the picture. It had been posted 13 minutes ago. I wasn't even looking for it. It just popped up on my screen. A family photo, sitting around a big wooden table. There were candles, full plates, mashed potatoes, and the turkey was all carved up. The pie wasn't mine. Right in the middle was Hans, wearing the sweater I'd mailed him last Christmas. Greta was smiling with one hand on his shoulder. The kids, Otto and Frida, had raised their plastic glasses of cider for a toast, and the caption said, "Full house, full hearts, happy Thanksgiving." There wasn't an empty chair, no seat saved, and nobody waiting for me. I didn't even feel the hurt at first, just this empty feeling, like I'd been erased so completely that even the air didn't know I'd shown up. I turned my phone over so the screen was against my palm, like it was something I should be ashamed of. Then I threw the coat on my shoulder, grabbed my suitcase, and started walking. I went past the automatic doors, past the rental car signs, past all the families leaning out of car windows to wave one last time. The cold hit me like a sentence I never wanted to hear. I still didn't know where I was going. I just knew I wasn't going to wait anymore. I didn't call a rideshare. I didn't send a text to Hans. I didn't try again. I just walked. The wheels of my suitcase made a soft clicking sound behind me, dragging across the cracks in the sidewalk like a slow, faint metronome. There were families everywhere. Parents buckling in their sleepy toddlers, college kids laughing into speakerphones, rides pulling up with the music blaring. Everyone had someplace to be. Everyone but me. The air outside the terminal had that November chill to it, thin, sharp, and dry. It was the kind of cold that gets right through your clothes and skin to settle just above your bones. But I kept on walking past the shuttle pickup, past the long line of taxis that I wasn't about to get into. I passed a mother giving a hot chocolate to an older woman. I don't know why I paid attention to that, but I did. Maybe it was because she looked older than me, and she had someone bringing her something warm. About a quarter of a mile from the airport, there was a low building wedged between a budget car rental lot and a chain motel. It was Klaus's Diner. The flickering neon sign was missing the E, which blinked like it couldn't decide if it even belonged there. The windows were all fogged up, and somebody had taped paper turkeys to the inside. I could tell it was warm in there because of all the condensation. I only hesitated for a second before I opened the door. The bell over the frame jingled with a tired sound. Inside, it smelled like bacon, grease, and cinnamon, and old coffee. There were 6 people in the booths, all spread out. A delivery guy was slumped over his newspaper. An old couple sat there eating in total silence. And one lady at the counter was just spinning her spoon around and around in a coffee mug, like she was counting the seconds. The waitress behind the counter, a woman with a ponytail pulled so tight it probably hurt, looked up. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said. It wasn't one of those fake happy greetings, just a kind one. I nodded. "You too," I told her. She grabbed a menu, one of those laminated ones, and showed me to a booth by the window. "We're a little short-staffed today," she said, "but we've still got turkey and pie. It might be a little slow." "Pie sounds just fine," I told her, and slid into the booth. I didn't realize how stiff my knees were until I sat down. "What kind you want?" she asked, with a little smile. "We've got pumpkin, apple, or pecan." She also mentioned they had coffee and hot tea. I told her I'd take a piece of pecan and some black tea. "You got it," she said. I didn't take my coat off right away. I just sat there for a moment, my hands resting on the tabletop, like I was just waiting for someone to show up and tell me the whole thing was a mistake. That I had the time wrong, that a car was just around the corner, that the photo had been posted too early. But nobody came. My phone was still lying face down. It buzzed once. I didn't even look. When the pie showed up, it had a little dollop of whipped cream that had slumped over to the side. The crust was cracked. It wasn't a pretty pie, but it was the kind of pie you can tell someone made because they actually meant it. The tea came in a chipped white mug. I took a bite. It wasn't the greatest pie I'd ever had, but it was warm and it was real, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't something I'd made for someone else. It was mine. I took my time with it. I didn't pull out my phone or scroll through anything. I was just sitting in a booth in a diner, a half-mile from an airport terminal where I'd been completely forgotten. And somehow, in that moment, I felt more seen than I had in years at my son's house. I watched the steam coming off my tea and thought about the last time I'd been invited somewhere without it also coming with a request. "No, can you babysit? Or can you help us with the car? Or can you bring dessert? Just, we want you here." That's what Hans had said. "The kids miss you. It won't be the same without you." And yet, it was the same. No, it was actually worse. Because this time, I had allowed myself to believe it. By the time I was finished with the pie, the tea was cold. I flagged down the waitress for the check. She looked over at my empty plate. "Want another slice to go?" she asked. I paused for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, for later." "Best decision you'll make all day," she said, and gave me a little wink. The second slice came in a small paper box, tucked into a little white bag. I held it gently, like it was something fragile. I walked back out into the cold. The sun had already gone down, and the parking lot lights had just started to come on. It was Thanksgiving, and I had nowhere to go. And yet, it was strange, but I didn't feel lost. Not exactly. I just felt finished. I walked back the way I came, but I wasn't going back to the terminal. I was heading for a little neon vacancy sign I had seen earlier. Klaus's Motel, the sign read, "Weekly rates available." It was the kind of place with stucco walls, beige trim, and vending machines that would probably eat your coins, but the lights were on. And right then, That was good enough. The guy behind the counter looked half asleep, and a football game was flickering on a television behind him. One night, he asked. I just nodded. ID and a card, he said. He didn't ask why I was alone. He didn't ask what brought me to town. He just slid a flimsy key across the counter. Room 108. End of the row. The room smelled faintly of bleach and loneliness. It had a single bed, 2 lamps with shades that didn't match, and a television older than my youngest grandchild. But it had heat, the kind that hummed low and steady from the vent. I sat down on the edge of the bed and finally took off my coat. My back ached, and my feet ached even more. But my heart, the part of me that should have been in a million pieces, just felt still, quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. I turned my phone over. 3 missed calls. 2 from Hans, 1 from Greta, and a text from Hans. Dad, where are you? I thought you were flying in tomorrow. No apology. No mention of the photo. Just confusion, like I was the one who had disappeared, like I was the one who got the date wrong. I didn't respond. Instead, I unzipped my bag and pulled out my old notebook, the one I use for grocery lists and quiet thoughts, the stuff that's too small to say out loud. I flipped to a blank page and wrote a single sentence. I am not spare. Then, below it, I wrote, I am not a placeholder. I am not a side dish at someone else's table. I stared at those lines for a long time. Then I underlined them both. I didn't cry. A few years ago, I might have. 5 years ago, I would have for sure. But tonight, there were no tears. Just clarity. It was cold, clean, and sharp. Like winter showing up without being asked. The next morning, the motel room smelled like stale coffee and cheap detergent. I'd slept in my clothes, not because I was lazy, but because I hadn't even planned to unpack. I hadn't planned to stay. But plans need other people to keep their word, and mine had failed before the plane even touched the ground. I sat on the edge of the bed, my feet flat on the scratchy carpet, watching the steam rise from the little coffee maker near the sink. I hadn't cried the night before, not once. I think a younger me would have, back when I still believed that being needed was the same thing as being wanted. The silence in the room wasn't heavy. It was honest. There's a big difference. Heavy silence waits for something to break it. Honest silence doesn't ask a single thing from you. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an answer. My phone sat there on the nightstand, face down, blinking every so often like it was trying to remind me it was still there. But I just let it blink. I wasn't ready to hear Hans's voice, or Greta's confusion, or some carefully worded apology that would never actually use the word sorry. I knew exactly what was coming. A bunch of excuses would be coming my way. A mixed up date, maybe, or something about preparing the turkey, or the kids being crazy, or Greta's sister just showing up without warning. They'd cover it all up with fake concern, asking if I was safe, if I needed a ride. They'd offer a little warmth they didn't mean to hold back, like a little bit of politeness could somehow fix forgetfulness. But that morning, I wasn't in the mood for fixing anything. I wanted the cold, hard truth, even if it hurt. The pie was still sitting there in the white paper bag next to my suitcase. I'd set it down carefully the night before. I had not touched it, and I would not. It had been made for people who did not even bother to make room for me. It was not going to cross my lips. I opened up that notebook again, the same one I'd scribbled in the night before. I looked at the words I'd written. I am not spare. I am not a side dish. I ran my finger slowly under the ink and added a third line underneath them. I am not furniture you drag out for holidays. That one really stuck with me. It was around 7:45 in the morning when I just decided to go for a walk. The air outside was clean but cold, with that sharp, late November bite that cuts right through your collar and reminds you you're alive, whether you like it or not. I just walked around for a while, without a plan, past a hardware store that wasn't open yet. There was a gas station where the guy behind the glass looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. A half-shuttered barbershop had a rotating pole that was still spinning, even though nobody was going to walk in that day. Finally, I saw the bank. It was a branch of the same bank I'd been using for over 30 years. There was no big aha moment, no dramatic music swelling up, just a simple thought. It was time. I walked right in as they opened the doors. A young man with nervous eyes and a tie that didn't quite go with his shirt greeted me. Good morning, sir. How can I help you today? I'd like to speak with someone about my accounts, I said. All of them. He nodded and led me to a small office with glass walls and plastic chairs. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from a woman named Anna. She was in her mid-30s, wore thin red glasses, and had a way of looking you straight in the eye that made you feel like you had to tell the truth. "What can I do for you today, Mr. Schneider?" "Walter Schneider." "All right, Mr. Schneider," she said. I leaned forward. "I want to stop every single automatic payment to my family, starting today." Her fingers stopped cold over the keyboard. "All of them?" "Yes," I said. She looked over her screen. "Looks like you have 2 recurring transfers. One to your son Hans for household expenses, and one for Greta's student loan. There's also a college savings account that lists their children as beneficiaries. Close the college account. Freeze the rest. You can keep the charity donations, but not 1 more cent to Hans or Greta." She didn't ask me why. She just nodded. I appreciated that kind of quiet efficiency. After a moment, she said carefully, "There's also a power of attorney on file. Your son is listed. I want to revoke it." "Understood." She printed the forms. I signed them with a pen that clicked too loudly in the quiet office. Each signature felt like a little exhale. When we finished, she said softly, "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "No," I said. "I've helped enough people." I walked out of the bank and into the cold with a kind of clarity I had not known in years. It wasn't anger or revenge. It was just something simple and steady, like the sound of gravel under your boots. I stopped at a bakery and bought a roll that was still warm from the oven. I ate it outside on a bench, watching the pigeons gather at my feet. I didn't feel powerful, just real. Like I had finally stepped out of someone else's story and back into my own. When I got back to the motel, I opened the drawer next to the bed and pulled out 2 folders I had been carrying for years. One was labeled Hans, thick with receipts, invoices, and bank statements. The other was labeled Lena, thin, but full of warmth. Lena was Hans's daughter from his first marriage. She was 23 now, finishing up nursing school back east. She was the only one who still called me just to talk. The only one who never asked for anything but my attention. Inside her folder were letters, birthday cards, a printout of her college graduation photo, and a recipe I'd written out for her when she tried to make my late wife's chicken pot pie. I picked it up and smiled. The corner still had a flour smudge on it. I placed both folders side by side. Then I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. "Mr. Wagner," I said when he answered. "It's Walter. I need to make some changes to my will." He paused just long enough that I knew he understood. "I will clear my schedule," he said. I hung up and did not feel guilty. Did not feel regret. I just felt like I had finally stopped waiting for someone else to tell me what I was worth. That night, I warmed up the motel's leftover tea in the microwave, tore the second slice of pie in half, and threw the rest in the trash. Some things, no matter how much effort you put into them, just aren't meant to be eaten. And some invitations were never meant for you. They were meant for what you could do for others. But I was done giving that away. The train ride home was uneventful, and that was a true gift. I sat by the window, my hands folded in my lap, watching the trees blur into soft streaks of brown and gray. I was finally heading home, not to a place of obligation, but to a place of my own choosing. No one sat next to me, which was just fine. I was glad for that. I didn't want to have to explain the pie box sitting in the trash or the motel key that was still in my coat pocket. I didn't want to have to tell anyone how a Thanksgiving invitation had ended with a cup of motel tea and a signature at the bank. I just wanted it to be quiet. Not the kind of silence that hurts, but the kind that finally lets you think after years of having a bunch of background noise in your head. When I stepped back inside my house, it still smelled like home. Old wood and lemon oil. The air was cold, but clean. I hadn't been gone for long, but I came back a different man. My hands automatically reached for the thermostat, then the kettle. It was the same routine I'd done for decades. And yet, it felt new now. I took my tea to the kitchen table and sat in my usual spot, looking out the window. Then I opened the drawer, the one I had been avoiding. The folders were right where I left them, tucked behind all the warranty receipts and insurance notices. I pulled out the one I had labeled Hans. It felt a lot heavier than I remembered. Inside were all the copies, every single record, and every IOU that was never repaid. The mortgage help when his and Greta's second house fell through. The $5,000 I wired them when Greta went back to graduate school. The time I co-signed for their Subaru, even though I had not driven in 3 years. There were daycare receipts from when Frida was born. A letter from the private preschool confirming I had paid the deposit. A handwritten note from Greta on a sticky note saying, "We'll pay you back once Hans's bonus clears." It never did, but I never asked about it. I told myself back then that it wasn't about the money. It was about love. I kept telling myself that, even on birthdays I wasn't invited to, and on weekends they were too busy to call. One document really stood out. A copy of the check I wrote when Hans turned 35 and lost his job. $10,000. No questions asked. He told me he would pay me back in a year. That was 7 years ago. I remember how proud he sounded when he took it, and how quiet he went once he cashed it. I laid each paper out on the kitchen table like a mosaic of silence. A collage of things I was never supposed to bring up. That's the unspoken deal, isn't it? Parents give and give and give, and the reward is that we're not allowed to talk about it without sounding petty. We are told it is a noble thing to forget our sacrifices. That keeping score means you're bitter. But as I looked at that table, I did not see bitterness. I saw proof, not of money lost, but of time, of my presence, of my care. I opened the other folder, Lena's. It was thin, yes, but it was filled with more heart than the other one ever was. Inside was a birthday card she drew for me when she was 6. It had stick figures holding hands. It said, "To Grandpa Walter, you make the best toast." A thank you note she mailed the first year of college. "Thanks for the care package. Finals week is brutal, but your cornbread made me cry." A photo of her with her stethoscope, taken the day she got her internship. I had printed the picture myself after she emailed it to me. She didn't ask for money. She didn't need me to fix anything for her. She just called. She asked about my day. She asked for my opinion on the books she was reading. She remembered the anniversary of Helga's passing without anyone reminding her. I placed both folders side by side on the table, one heavy with obligation, the other light with love. And then I reached for my notebook. I started writing. Not a letter this time. Not yet. Just a list. Line by line, I wrote down everything I had given Hans and Greta over the last 15 years. Not just the checks, but the favors, the babysitting, the times I canceled my own doctor's appointments just to drive across town and wait in a school parking lot. The broken weekends. The holidays I spent all by myself because they were traveling and had forgotten to tell me. The stories I didn't tell because they might make things uncomfortable. The list went on for 4 pages, front and back. When I finished, I didn't feel angry. I felt like I had just drawn the final line on a boundary I should have set a decade ago. I tore out the pages, folded them up, and put them inside the Hans folder. Not out of spite, but for the sake of my memory. Because we deserve to remember what we have given. That night, I sat in the dark with a single lamp on. The folders were still open beside me. I didn't drink. I didn't try to distract myself. I just stared out the window at the street light flickering against the frost on the pavement. I thought of that Thanksgiving photo again, of the caption, "Full house, full hearts." There had been no room at their table for me, not even in the picture. And I realized something that stopped me cold. They weren't waiting for me to show up late. They were hoping I wouldn't show up at all, because then they wouldn't have to explain my absence. Then their story would stay perfect. The next morning, I called her Wagner again and told him I was ready. We met at his small office just off the main street. He had a gold-framed diploma and a photo of his bulldog in a Christmas sweater. He didn't need any details. He just nodded, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and started asking the right questions. "You want to remove Hans and Greta from the estate?" "Yes." "All assets, every last one, and transfer them into a trust for Lena?" "Yes." "She will have full control when I pass away. Emergency access is only with my approval while I am alive." "Any conditions?" "Yes. For her education, health, and housing. No sports cars. No investments in her boyfriend's podcast." Her Wagner smiled. "Understood." I smiled back. "Also," I added, "I want to attach a letter to the will." "Legal or personal?" he asked. "Personal. A statement of intent." "It won't be legally binding," he said. "It doesn't need to be," I replied. "It just needs to be true." We spent an hour drafting it. When we were done, I left the office with a folder that was thicker than Lena's ever was. But this one carried a weight that I did not resent. I went home, took the pie dish out of my suitcase, washed it, dried it, and put it back in the cupboard. Not as a symbol, but just as something clean again. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, opened a fresh page in my notebook, and began writing the letter. Not out of anger, not out of hurt, but because I had words that finally belonged to me. I began simply. "To whoever reads this after I am gone, this is not about punishment. It is about honesty. I had given quietly and repeatedly, without asking for anything in return. And in return, I was edited out. This is not an act of revenge. This is the reclamation of my legacy, my choices, and my voice. My tea was cold again when I finished writing, but it didn't bother me this time. I was choosing my own comfort now, and that made all the difference. I didn't get much sleep that night. It wasn't because I was upset, but because my mind was sharper than it had been in years. When you've carried the same weight for so long, the moment you put it down, your body just forgets how to rest. I sat at the kitchen table well past midnight. My notebook was open, a pen in my hand, and the folders were spread out beside me like pieces of evidence. I wasn't writing a will. Her Wagner and the notary would handle that part. What I was writing was something much harder, a letter that wouldn't be read until after I was gone. It was a letter I hoped would never be misunderstood, even if it would never be forgiven. I started it 3 times, crossing out each version. One was too emotional, another was too guarded, and the last was just too vague. Finally, I started again. To whoever is reading this, I want to be clear. This is not a punishment. It's the truth, one I should have spoken out loud years ago. If you're wondering why I've made the decisions I have, this is your answer. I paused, taking a sip of the lukewarm, bitter tea I'd forgotten I made. It was perfect for this. I continued. I spent my life believing that giving without question was love, that patience was a virtue, that silence kept the peace. But silence doesn't keep the peace. It keeps patterns. And that pattern, I knew, was ending right here. The words weren't angry, they were just honest. And I've learned that honesty has a certain weight to it. It doesn't need to shout to land heavily. It just needs to be written. I wrote about Hans and how the gifts became expectations, how my support turned into an obligation, and how the only phone calls I got were when something was broken. I wrote about the house I helped save, the car I co-signed for, and the bills I covered without being asked. I wrote about how quickly I vanished from their minds once the check had cleared. I explained that I didn't resent the giving. I resented the eraser that came after. Then I wrote about Lena. I described the afternoon she called just to talk about her day. The time she mailed me a photo of her cat wrapped in my old scarf. The time she sent me a typed letter because, as she said, my hands deserved something other than screens. I wrote, she never once asked for anything but my presence. And when someone sees you as a person, not a bank, not a backup plan, not a formality, you give them what you never gave the others, everything. When I finished, the clock read 2:01 in the morning. I signed the letter with my full name, Walter Emerson Schneider. Then I folded it into thirds, slid it into a blank envelope, and tucked it inside the file her Wagner would notarize. In the morning, I called him again and told him I had a personal item to include with the trust. He didn't ask questions, he just told me to bring it in. When I arrived, he greeted me as he always did, reserved, but warm. We went over the forms one more time. My accounts, the house, my pension, and the investment accounts I barely touched. All of it was now listed in the trust with one beneficiary, Lena. He double-checked every clause. You'll keep full control while you're living, he said. And she'll have discretionary access to funds for her education, health, housing, and emergencies with your approval. Is that correct? Yes, I said. And after you pass, she'll receive everything without any conditions. And the letter, he asked, glancing at the envelope in my hand. Include it with the file, I told him. Mark it personal, and to be opened only by Lena. He nodded. It won't have legal standing. It has moral weight, I replied. That's enough. We signed the documents in triplicate. I initialed the trust packet, then the revocation of Hans's power of attorney, and finally the updated will. When we finished, her Wagner looked across the desk at me for a long moment. I've been doing this a long time, Walter, he said. Most people wait too long to do what you're doing. They die hoping their silence will somehow sort everything out. I nodded. That used to be me. I left his office with the copies in my hand. They were sealed and dated with no fanfare or parade, just a quiet sense of completion. I didn't go straight home. I walked past the post office, past the school where Hans once played baseball, and I sat in the bleachers alone. I walked past the bakery where they still sold Helga's favorite shortbread cookies. I stopped and bought a box even though I wasn't hungry, just because some things are worth remembering, even if no one else does. At home, I put the papers in my fireproof box under the bed, not because I was hiding them, but because they were finished. The decision had been made. I wouldn't be rewriting them again. That evening, I sat in the living room with the box beside me and called Lena. She picked up after the second ring. "Hey, Grandpa," she said. I paused. Her voice alone felt like warmth. "I've made some changes," I told her. "To the estate. To everything." She didn't interrupt. "I wanted you to know first because you'll be seeing your name. And I want you to understand it isn't because you asked. It's because you never did." There was a silence on the line, a truly complete one. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to," I said. "You already did. Every time you called, every time you remembered something I never thought anyone would. That was enough." Her voice cracked as she began to cry. "Then cry," I told her. "But don't you ever say you didn't earn this." She did not speak for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you for everything." I smiled. "There's a letter for you in the file. Read it when the time comes. Not a second before." "I understand," she said. And I believed her. We hung up. I sat there in the silence. But this time it was something different. It wasn't heavy, and it wasn't just honest. It was peaceful. That night, I cooked dinner for one, just some soup and a slice of bread. I lit a candle, not because anyone was coming over, but just because I was there. And then I whispered to the empty room, "It's done." It wasn't a big declaration. It was like a blessing. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I finally turned my phone back on. 15 missed calls, 12 texts, a few voicemails. The usual suspects: Hans, Greta, one from their neighbor who always gets too involved, and a couple from an unknown number I assumed was Greta's sister. I did not listen to any of them. I did not need to. The pattern was easy to predict. First came concern, either fake or fleeting. Then came confusion, as if I had done something wrong by stepping away. Guilt-filled apologies would follow, disguised as explanations. And finally, a hint of panic, not about me, of course, but about money and other logistics. When would the next deposit be hitting the account? I waited until the next afternoon before I responded. Not with a phone call, but with a handwritten letter. No emojis, no red receipts, no impression of empathy in real time. Just paper, ink, and a signature at the bottom. "Hans, this is not a punishment. This is a boundary. A boundary you helped create. You asked me to be less involved, less present. I am honoring that request. No more monthly support. No more emergency funds. No more covering for forgotten mortgages or inflated holidays. You're a grown man, a husband, a father, and you've made it clear you wish to handle your family matters without my input. I respect that. I hope you understand that I must also handle mine. Dad." I folded the letter up neatly, slid it into an envelope, and dropped it into a blue mailbox downtown. It made a soft clank as it fell inside. It felt like a closing bell on a chapter one should have ended years ago. The next day, there was silence. Not a single word. Not a "how could you?" or "let's talk." It was the first time in years Hans let the quiet stay. And strangely, that hurt a lot less than his words ever did. The motel manager knocked that morning to ask if I needed another week. I said no. What I needed was not more time to just linger around. It was a new rhythm, a quieter one. It was not exactly new, it was just mine. I found a modest apartment near the edge of town. Nothing fancy. One bedroom, a small balcony, and a parking space shaded by a sycamore tree that dropped golden leaves like it was always October. The living room had a faint pine scent, probably from the last tenant's overly enthusiastic use of holiday cleaners. The air was still enough for me to think clearly. I signed the lease 3 months in advance. I moved in with 2 suitcases, a worn duffel bag, and a box labeled Lena. The first thing I bought was an armchair from a thrift store down the road. It had cracked leather, a sunken seat, and a small tear in the left armrest. It reminded me of the one my wife used to read in, the one she refused to let me throw out, even when the springs started to poke through. I placed it by the window where the morning light came in softly. Next to it, I set a small round table, just wide enough for a lamp and a coffee mug. That became my space. Every morning, I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, sat in that chair, and opened a notebook. I did not write about Hans. Not anymore. That chapter was closed. I wrote about Lena. I wrote about the time she fell off her bike and insisted on getting back up all by herself. I wrote about how she used to pluck dandelions and give them to her grandmother like they were priceless bouquets. I wrote about her quiet strength, which had always reminded me of her mother. I wrote her letters that I did not send, pages of advice she did not ask for but might one day need, notes on retirement savings, on how to recognize manipulation and on how to check the oil in a car, even if someone says, "Don't worry about it." I wrote her stories. I wrote her warnings. I wrote her love. A few mornings later, while the coffee was still hot and the frost hadn't quite melted from the windows, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost let it go, but something in my chest tightened. I answered. Grandpa. Her voice did not sound older, just more real, less filtered through family functions and secondhand updates. Lena, I said, standing up without even realizing it. I got your number from Mom's old address book. I hope that's okay. It's more than okay, I said, trying to swallow the tightness in my throat. She paused, then said, I just wanted to tell you I got the scholarship. Full ride to Johns Hopkins. I sat back down. My knees had gone soft. My breath caught in a place I hadn't felt in years. That is incredible, sweetheart. I wasn't going to apply, she confessed. It felt too far, too big. But then I found that letter you sent me last year, the one about doing hard things on purpose. Page 3, paragraph 2, I said, and she laughed. Exactly. You always know. She told me about her hospital internship, about working night shifts and drinking cafeteria coffee, about her doubts, and about how she still slept with a reading lamp on when she was stressed. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Sometimes, silence is the kindest response. When the call ended, she asked, could I come visit you sometime? I didn't hesitate. Of course. I've got pie. Grandma's is the one with the cinnamon crust. That seals it, she said. You're officially my favorite relative. I always was. I replied, and we both laughed. I hung up the phone and just sat there still. Not empty, not buzzing with emotion, but just full. A quiet kind of fullness. That evening, I made 2 pies. One for the freezer and one for the next day, just in case she came early. I set out the good plates, the ones I hadn't used since my wife passed away. I vacuumed the hallway. I aired out the guest bedding. It felt both absurd and sacred at the same time. And then I did something small but significant. I left the porch light on. The days that followed were slow but golden. I did not count them. I let them count me. I wrote more letters. This time, they were addressed, stamped, and ready to go. I started sorting through the documents I'd been avoiding, my will, property deeds, and life insurance. I removed Hans from the power of attorney and replaced him with a law firm I trusted. I listed Lena as my healthcare proxy. They were quiet changes. Not dramatic, but they were right. I didn't call Hans to explain. He wouldn't have listened. And for once, I didn't need him to. Some things do not require an announcement, just action. One morning, while I was at the grocery store, I ran into my neighbor's niece. Is your son still living in Widenaw Park? She asked. No, I said. Just me now? She nodded like she understood more than I had said. You seem lighter, she added. Not lighter, I said. Just not holding things that weren't mine. That night, I opened the box labeled Lena. Inside were years of photos, notes, and birthday cards she had made as a child. A ceramic turtle with my name etched into its shell. A hospital wristband from the day she was born. And a dried rose from my wife's garden she had once pressed between the pages of a Bible. I laid them out on the table like a map of something I'd nearly forgotten. The line between memory and legacy. When the knock came the next afternoon, I wasn't surprised. I opened the door, and there she was, Lena. A backpack over one shoulder, her hair a little longer, but her smile exactly the same. You didn't say when you'd get here, I said. I didn't want you to feel like you had to prepare anything, she replied. I always prepare, I said, stepping aside. She looked around. It's cozy, she said. It's honest, I replied. She walked over to the armchair and ran her fingers along the tear. This was Grandma's style, she said. I know, I replied. Some things never really leave. We ate pie and talked for a while. She told me about a patient she had lost and how nobody had trained her to say goodbye. I told her about my wife's last breath, about the silence that comes after a final exhale, and how all you can do is just witness it. She cried, and I just sat there next to her. I didn't try to stop her. Later, after she went to bed, I went back to my chair and sat in the dark. I wasn't sad or triumphant. I was just present. A light was on in the guest room, and I could hear the soft hum of her breathing from down the hall. The future was just one room away. Some inheritances aren't about money. They're about the people you have. Lena showed up. While others used my love like a ladder to get somewhere, she built a home on it. And I was finally home, too. The invitation came on a Thursday afternoon. Not with a phone call, but in an envelope. There was no return address, just my name and Hans's handwriting pressed into the center of a cream-colored envelope that I hadn't seen since Greta's wedding invitations. The handwriting hadn't changed. It was slanted, confident, too sure of itself for the message it was carrying. Inside was a folded card, gold-trimmed, on thick paper, the kind that feels like it wants to be important. It simply said, "Dinner at our place, Saturday at 6 o'clock in the evening. Hope you can join us. Hans and Greta." No apology, no mention of Thanksgiving, no acknowledgement of the 42 minutes I stood at gate 3A or the 3 days I spent waiting for a knock that never came. Just dinner. As if nothing had happened. As if a pie wrapped in foil and a thick silence weren't wounds. I read it twice, then put it on the counter and stared at it, hoping it would somehow explain itself. It did not. It never would. But I went anyway. Not for them, but for me. There's a kind of peace that comes when you don't need anything anymore. I didn't need their warmth. I didn't need closure. I was not hoping for reconciliation or a second chance. I went because the last time I had stood in front of their house, I had been carrying a pie and a whole lot of expectations. This time, I carried neither. I wore a clean button-down shirt, a pair of slacks, and a gray wool coat my wife had picked out for me in the autumn of 2007. It still fits, though it's a little looser now. Everything was. Life has a way of loosening its grip on the things you once thought you'd always have to carry. I did not bring a gift, no bottle of wine, no dessert tray, just a leather folder tucked under my arm. Greta opened the door. Not Hans. She smiled like a politician, wide, superficial, and designed to make me feel at ease. "Walter, I'm so glad you could make it," she said. She moved aside quickly, motioning me inside like I was late for something that mattered more than I did. The living room looked the same, immaculate and cold, like a showroom someone occasionally remembered to breathe in. The kids were nowhere to be seen. No toys, no crayon drawings, just a sterile perfection that made you want to wipe your shoes twice. Hans appeared from the hallway, adjusting the cuff of his shirt like he hadn't been watching from a shadowy corner. "Dad," he said. He just nodded, no hug. "Hans." We just stood there for a second too long. Then he motioned toward the dining room. "Dinner's ready. Greta made that braised short rib recipe you used to like." "I remember," I said. "Used to?" He chuckled nervously. Greta did not laugh. The table was set for 6. There was too much silverware. The linen napkins were folded like origami. Candles were already lit, their scent dancing over the smell of meat and rosemary. Across the table sat Greta's sister, Heidi, and her husband, Klaus. 2 strangers I'd once loaned money to when their water heater exploded. They smiled like we shared memories. We did not. We ate slowly and politely. The conversation stayed on safe topics: the weather, home renovations, and traffic. No one mentioned Thanksgiving. No one mentioned the pie. I just listened and watched. I counted the ways the entire evening was a performance, designed to feel normal. Halfway through the meal, Hans cleared his throat. "Dad, we've been meaning to reach out." I looked up, not at him, but at Greta. She set down her fork, right on cue. "We were thinking," she said, "with the kids growing up and with your experience, your wisdom, it might be nice for them to spend more time with you. Maybe you could teach them some of your skills on Saturdays. Maybe even do a little driving practice with Hans Jr. when he gets older." I just nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. And Hans added, "We've been thinking about consolidating our accounts, just streamlining things for the kids' college funds. Thought you might have some insight, maybe help oversee some of it, like you used to, just for a little while." There it was. The request wrapped in flattery, seasoned with nostalgia, and served warm. I wiped my mouth with a napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it next to my plate. Then I reached under the table and put the leather folder on my lap. "I brought something," I said. Hans straightened up in his chair. Greta's posture changed, too, becoming more alert than was comfortable. I opened the folder. "These are records," I said. "Copies of every transfer, every loan, and every bill I've paid or covered over the last 15 years. Greta blinked. "There's also a summary, line by line. You'll see that the total comes to just over $286,000. Silence. I turned a few pages, letting them see the dates, the consistency, the amount of it all. "I'm not here for repayment," I said calmly. "I'm here for acknowledgement." Hans's mouth opened, but no words came out. I didn't feel the silence. Instead, I pulled out a second sheet of paper. "This," I continued, is a letter I wrote 2 months ago. It outlines a transfer of ownership, specifically of the trust your mother and I established before she passed. It no longer names you as the primary beneficiary. Greta's sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat. It now names Lena, I said. Greta's fork slipped from her hand. The sound of it hitting the porcelain plate was way too loud. She's a minor, Hans said quickly. She's not even. She turns 18 next week, I replied. She has a scholarship, a plan, and a spine. I stood, placing the folder gently on the table. This isn't about retribution. This is about clarity. Greta spoke then, her voice sharper than she intended. You're doing this because of Thanksgiving. No, I said. I'm doing this because of everything before it. I turned toward the door. My coat was already waiting on the armchair. No one moved to get it for me. As I reached for the handle, Hans called out, Dad, wait. I paused. Not for him. For the moment. I was going to call you back after Thanksgiving, he said. I just got caught up. I just nodded. That's the thing about being caught up, Hans, I said. Eventually, you have to choose what you carry and what you leave behind. I opened the door. The cool night air hit me like an old friend. Dinner was nice, I said. But I'm full now. And I stepped out into the night. The stars were out, bright and unapologetic, not asking for permission. I walked slowly, not because I was tired, but because it was the first time I wasn't walking toward something I wasn't sure about. I already knew who would be calling next. The phone rang at 6:12 in the evening. This time it wasn't a missed call or a voicemail I could ignore. It rang loud and clear. I set my spoon down. I had some leftover chicken soup from the night before and stared at the screen. It was Hans. I didn't answer right away. I let it ring 3 times. 4. Then I picked up. Dad? He asked, like the words still fit. Can we talk? I didn't respond at first. I just let the silence sit. 1 Mississippi. 2. I think we should sit down. Maybe for dinner, he offered. Dinner. As if Thanksgiving hadn't happened. As if I hadn't stood there for 42 minutes at the airport curb with a warm pie getting cold on my knees. I didn't say anything, but I didn't say no. Friday, I finally said. 7 o'clock. He seemed surprised. I agreed. I couldn't blame him. I was surprised, too. That Friday, I wore the same coat I'd brought on the flight. It still held the faint smell of roasted cinnamon from that pie dish. I drove across town slower than usual, letting the winter wind press against the windshield like a question I wasn't ready to answer. When I pulled up outside their 2-story house, the one they had moved into after Hans's promotion, the porch light was on. It was the only thing that felt like home. I knocked. Greta opened the door, her smile too wide, her voice too high-pitched. Walter, you look great. Her tone was like confetti after a funeral. Hans stood behind her, his hands in his pockets, avoiding my eyes. The kids weren't there, just the 3 of us. I stepped inside. The house looked staged, like a realtor had just left 5 minutes before and removed all the signs of real life. Too clean, too curated, too late. Dinner was salmon and asparagus, no pie. Greta chatted nervously. I nodded when I had to. Hans barely spoke. The sound of silverware against ceramic was louder than anything that was said. At one point, Greta excused herself to check the dryer, but it wasn't laundry day. That's when Hans cleared his throat. Dad, about Thanksgiving. I looked at him. Not with a harsh look, just for a long enough time. I thought Greta told you we were delayed, he continued. Traffic. Then the baby had a fever. It got chaotic. No apology. Just an explanation disguised as a circumstance. I waited 42 minutes, I said calmly. You said the kids missed me. He looked down. We didn't mean to. You didn't have to mean it, I interrupted. You just had to show up. He nodded the way people do when they want a conversation to end, not to heal. I reached into my coat and pulled out a manila envelope, setting it on the table. He looked at it like it might explode. Documentation, I said. Estate changes, legal updates, my new power of attorney, beneficiary assignments. His mouth opened, then shut. He didn't touch the envelope. I didn't bring this to threaten you, I continued. I brought it to close a chapter. I want you to know where things stand. He stared at the envelope like it was a verdict. I see, he said finally. So that's what this dinner's about. I smiled softly. No, that's what the envelope is about. The dinner was your idea. He leaned back in his chair. Lena. Yes, I said. Lena. He looked away, not angry or sad, just unprepared for the fact that love can take a different shape than what he expected. She called me, I said, out of nowhere. She didn't ask for anything, just told me she got into Johannes Hopkins. Full ride. Remember when she wanted to be a vet? Now she's going to be a doctor. Hans nodded faintly. I'm going to help her, I said. She didn't ask. That's why. He rubbed the back of his neck. We've made mistakes, Dad. But this feels final, I offered. He didn't answer. It doesn't have to be, I said. But it does have to be honest. I'm not punishing you. I'm choosing peace for me. For once. Silence. Greta came back in and sat down. Everything okay? She asked. I nodded. Just tying up loose ends. I stood and put my napkin on the table. You're leaving? She asked. I came for dinner, I said. And we've eaten. Hans stood too. Dad, I hope you raise your children with presents, I said. Not obligation. That's all. They did not follow me out. The porch light was still on when I shut the car door. Back at the apartment, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and sat by the window. The folder labeled Lena still sat on the table. I picked it up, added a new page, a short note in handwriting I took my time with. Never accept invitations that arrive without sincerity. I folded the paper and slipped it between two scholarship forms. Some things needed to be said in person. Others could live in ink. 2 days later, Lena arrived. She brought a bag of apples and a handwritten recipe card. Her attempt at Grandma's pie. It's not perfect, she said. Neither am I replied. But I'll try it. We baked. We laughed. She told me about her plans, about Baltimore, about how she wanted to specialize in pediatrics because little people deserve the best medicine. I listened. She didn't ask about Hans. I didn't bring him up. That night, after she had left, I walked to the kitchen table, picked up the manila folder again, and removed one page, the one that had Hans's name. I did not shred it. I just placed it in a separate envelope, labeled it closed, because that's what it was. Not erased, just done. I'd shown up. I'd sat at the table. I'd listened. And I'd left with clarity. The dinner was not for me. It was to confirm what I already knew. And now, I was free to move forward with the one person who still called me Grandpa without shame, without strategy, and without strings attached. The porch light stayed on just for her. The next morning, I sat with a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, watching the light through the blinds shift across the floor like quiet clockwork. I didn't have much on my schedule. That was a gift, not a burden. For years, my days had been built around other people's problems, putting out their fires, keeping them burning, or pretending the smoke didn't bother me. Now, I let the pot simmer without a lid. I let things steep. I had thought I might feel regret after sending that RSVP, that somehow denying Hans would open a door to bitterness in me. But all I felt was relief. It wasn't a theatrical kind of feeling, not a big sigh of relief, just a looseness in my chest. Like when you finally take off a tie that's been on too tight for too long, and you remember what your own skin feels like. 2 days later, Lena called again. I told my roommate about you, she said. Her voice was lighter than before, like she was excited and nervous at the same time. She said, it's rare to have a grandpa who listens more than he lectures. I chuckled. I do plenty of lecturing, I told her. I just save it for when it counts. She told me she had a break coming up and wanted to visit for a weekend. Really? I said, a visit, not just a quick dinner. I said yes before she could even finish her sentence. We made some plans, a walk through the botanical garden, a trip to that old antique store on Freiburg Street I used to take her mother to. I started a list. I hadn't made a list for a long time, not one that was just for me. But before she showed up, something else came in the mail. It was from Hans again. This time, it wasn't an invitation, but a financial statement. A thick packet from his accountant, probably copied to me by mistake. Inside were a bunch of numbers, itemized expenses tied to family support, listed under the name Walter Schneider. Everything I'd ever paid for was labeled and quantified. There were years of notes, mortgage help, college tuition, a bridge loan, a vehicle down payment, and a business gap loan. Next to each one, it said, covered by Walter Schneider. And then, next to that, outstanding expectation of continuation. That word just sat in my stomach like a rock. Expectation. Not appreciation, not a contribution. Expectation. I stared at that word until it didn't make any sense anymore. Then I picked up a pen and wrote a word of my own. Closure. What I really wanted wasn't revenge. I didn't need Hans to beg or apologize or suddenly realize what he had done. I just needed to be able to name what had happened without flinching, without editing it, and without hoping for someone else to finally be clear. So I wrote a letter. Not one I'd ever send, but one I had to write for myself. Hans, you were never taught to need me. You were taught to use me. That's on me. That's on the way I loved with guilt instead of boundaries. You believed my generosity was your inheritance. But you were wrong. Inheritance isn't what's given. It's what's earned in how we show up. And you haven't shown up in years. I used to wait. I don't anymore. I live now, and I do it in a way you never taught me. By letting go. I folded the letter and put it in the same folder as the others. Lena arrived on a Friday, just before the rain started. She brought books, real ones, paperback with the corners all bent. She knew I didn't like screens. She said she found them at a used bookstore with a grandpa vibe. We read in the living room for an hour, neither of us saying much. Then she looked at me and said, I brought something else. It was a notebook, leather-bound, hand-stitched along the edges. She'd made it in a class called Narrative Medicine. The first page had a title, Legacy Letters. You should fill this, she said. Not with what happened, but with what matters. That night, I did. I wrote about the first time I held her, how she smelled like talcum powder and possibility. How her mother had cried just from watching me rock her. How I'd whispered promises into that soft little head, believing that time would keep them. I wrote about the cabin we almost bought in Vermont, about the way her grandma used to write grocery lists in cursive. How my father never said, I love you, but once bought me a green bike and oiled the chain every Saturday until I left for college. And I wrote about silence. Not the kind that hurts, but the kind that heals. The next day, I made pancakes the way her grandma used to. I burned the first batch. She said it tasted like memory. I took that as a compliment. At noon, Lena asked if we could visit her mother's grave. I hadn't gone in over a year, not because I didn't care, but because I never knew what to say. Lena brought tulips. I brought a short letter, just 3 lines. I'm learning how to be still. And in the stillness, I remember you. Thank you for loving me through the noise. We stood there for a while. No music, no words, just birds, wind, and the earth. Later that afternoon, there was a knock. Not the doorbell. A real knock. The kind where someone is not sure if they should be there. I opened it. It was Hans. He looked tired, but not humbled. More like someone whose ego had skipped breakfast. I got your message, he said, not stepping inside. I figured, I replied. He held up a piece of paper. It wasn't the invitation. It was a printout of the failed automatic transfer. You did this. No, I said. You did, son. I just stopped pretending it was mine to fix. He let out one of those theatrical sighs, hoping someone would ask if he was okay. I didn't ask. He looked around the apartment, saw Lena's books, the pie dish, and the notebook on the table. You replaced me. I didn't flinch. You left a long time ago. I just stopped following. He stepped back, like he was waiting for me to say more, for the invitation he still assumed would come. It did not. Tell Greta happy birthday, I said. He left. Lena watched from the hallway. She didn't smile or ask any questions. She just walked over, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, some people won't come back. Not because you pushed them away, but because they don't know how to return with respect. I nodded. That night, I wrote another letter. Not for Hans, but for me. I am no longer the man waiting at the airport, coat folded, pie dish in hand, searching the crowd for belonging. I am the man who built silence into a sanctuary, who traded expectation for peace, and who knows the ones who want to find you will, and the rest, let them stay lost. The heater clicked on. The apartment warmed up, and I let it, because not every story needs reconciliation. Some just need an honest ending. The next morning came with a gray light, the kind that softens everything. I stirred sugar into my coffee, one slow circle after another, watching the swirl fade like memory does when you stop holding on to it tight. My phone sat quietly on the counter. No new messages, no calls, just a blinking cursor waiting for someone to speak first. I did not. I had nothing left to chase. That day, I dropped off a donation bag at the church thrift shop. Inside were several of my old winter coats, a few books, and a pair of leather gloves Hans had given me for Christmas years ago. They were still soft, barely worn. I had kept them in good condition even after he had stopped visiting, even after he forgot the size of my hands. I imagined someone else wearing them this year, a man with cracked knuckles and cold mornings. Maybe those gloves could still carry warmth, even if not for me. I turned and walked out before the volunteer could say thank you. I wasn't in the mood for kindness that day. Later that week, I received an invitation, a real one, mailed in an ivory envelope with a gold trim addressed in Lena's handwriting. At first, I thought maybe she had planned something small, a quiet dinner, maybe just her and me. But when I opened it, I saw Hans's name. It was a birthday celebration for the twins. They were 7 years old already. There was a printed itinerary, RSVP details, a list of themed snacks and craft stations. And in the corner, tucked almost like an afterthought, was my name. Grandpa Walter, Pie Station if you're up for it. I smiled, but not for the reason they had hoped. I could see it now. How neatly the past can be repackaged, glossed over with glitter and streamers. How easily guilt could be disguised as olive branches. I was not angry, but I also was not fooled. I folded the invitation, not tearing it, but folding it once, then again. I slid it into the drawer next to the pie tins. That evening, I sat with Lena over a quiet dinner. She had made chicken pot pie from scratch, the crust flaking just right. She didn't mention the party. Neither did I. We talked about the weather, a book she was reading, and her plans for Thanksgiving. But I noticed the weight in her voice, the way her sentences ended a little too fast, like she was afraid of giving something away. After dessert, she stood by the sink, drying her hands. I said, "You don't have to protect him." She turned slowly. "I'm not. I mean emotionally. I see what he's doing." She nodded, her eyes steady. "I know, but they're still your grandchildren." "Blood is not a passcode, Lena," I said. "It's a starting point. Everything after that is earned." She didn't argue or apologize for including me. She just said, "So you won't come?" I shook my head. "No, but I'll send something quietly." The day of the party arrived with sunshine, the kind that feels unearned in winter. I stayed home, watched a documentary about migrating birds, wrote a letter to an old army friend I hadn't spoken to in years, and then, around 3 in the afternoon, I baked 2 pies, apple with lots of cinnamon, just like the twins liked them, at least from what I remembered the one time they had been at my house and managed to sit still long enough to finish a slice. I wrapped each pie carefully, then put them into a brown paper box I'd saved from a care package. On top, I added a note. It didn't say much, just for Lily and Jacob. "Hope your day is sweet. Grandpa S." I drove to the address on the invitation. Their new house was big and modern, with a stone driveway and planters out front. I did not ring the bell. I simply placed the box on the porch, took a quick photo of it for Lena, and drove away. That night, Lena texted me. "They loved it. Lily said yours was better than the bakery's." I replied, "Good." Then I put the phone down and turned off the lamp. A week passed, then another. No word from Hans. No thank you note. No photo of the twins smiling with pie on their cheeks. Just silence. But Lena kept coming. Small visits, a lunch here and there, a shared laugh over some old memory. I think she knew it was done. Whatever bridge remained had long since been washed out with the tide. Then came the email from Hans. Not to me, but to my lawyer. It was a request to talk about the distribution timeline for a property trust we had created years ago for the twins' education fund. The wording was clinical, but the intention was clear. Money was getting tight. And now, the door he had closed with pride was being knocked on with desperation. My lawyer forwarded the message to me with a note. "How would you like to proceed?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed 6 words. "No distributions at this time permitted," and hit send. The fallout was quiet, but you could feel it. Lena came by with a pie dish I hadn't lent her. She looked tired. I asked her how she was. "Hans is furious," she said. "I expected that. He said you're punishing him. I'm protecting the trust. He knows the terms. He says you're choosing me. I'm choosing what's right." She let out a long, slow breath. "I just want peace." I reached across the table, then stopped, standing in the middle of a crossfire. She looked at me, her eyes sharp with clarity. Maybe it's time I did, too. That weekend, I updated my will. Not out of anger, but out of peace. I changed the executor. I revised the charity contributions. I even added a section about the pie tins, saying they should be given to whoever remembers how to make the crust right. I smiled as I wrote that. Then I signed the last page, folded it gently, and placed it in the fireproof box under my bed. I haven't seen Hans in person since then. But one afternoon, I passed the park again, the one where Lena learned to ride her bike. where Hans once refused to even try. And there he was, sitting on that same bench alone, his head down, no phone in sight. He looked up as I passed, caught my eye, then quickly looked away. I did not stop. I kept walking, not out of spite, but out of a quiet sense of completion. Some conversations are better left to the wind. A few days later, Lena brought over a small painting she had done. It was a landscape of the view from my apartment. The brick buildings, the faded skyline, and the old tree that still bloomed late every year. "I thought you should have something that doesn't forget to bloom," she said. I looked at the canvas, at the light she had painted into the window, and something in me softened. I hung it above my writing desk, right where the morning sun could reach it. The season turned, the birds left, the wind got sharper, but I stayed put, rooted. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a burden or a transaction or a ghost in someone else's story. I felt like a man again, one who had nothing left to prove and no one left to chase. I did not expect the knock. Not that morning, not after the snow had started to settle like dust over every decision I'd made. It was a Wednesday, quiet. I was halfway through my coffee and had just turned the radio down low enough to hear my own thoughts. The knock came once, firm but hesitant. I opened the door to see Lena standing there, a folder in her hands, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Dad, you need to see this," she said. She stepped inside without waiting for permission, just like she used to when she was 9 and came home from school with a drawing of a dragon she was proud of. Only this time, the folder did not hold dragons. It held court documents, financial disclosures, emails, screenshots, a whole thread. "Hans has been trying to move the money," she said softly. "What money?" I asked, though I already knew. "The old joint account with Mom's name on it, the one you never closed. He filed paperwork to have it renamed under his business. He forged your signature, Dad." The silence that followed was not shock. It was a silence that knew this story's shape, a silence that had heard the cracks before and was just waiting for them to widen. "I spoke to a lawyer," Lena continued. "You're protected. But if you hadn't changed the trust 6 months ago." She didn't need to finish that sentence. I reached for the folder, flipping through the neatly tabbed sections. There, in black and white, was the proof. Hans's choices were no longer subtle, no longer quiet, no longer just emotional erosion. This was theft. I sat down. Lena knelt beside the coffee table, waiting. I did not speak right away. Instead, I pulled from the drawer beneath the side table and got out an old notebook. My ledger of kindnesses. Not just literal money. Not this time. But things that were given. Time, shelter, patience. I flipped back to the first page. October 2001. Paid off Hans's car loan. Next page. May 2006. Covered the down payment for the first house. It went on. February 2011. Helped after a failed startup, no repayment. June 2016. Paid for private therapy sessions after separation. November 2018. Funded the Werner twins preschool. Not one of those lines had been written in anger. I just kept track. Not because I needed a scorecard, but because sometimes the only way to stay sane when you're being quietly erased is to keep a record that says, "I was here. I mattered." I closed the notebook and looked at Lena. "Let the lawyer proceed," I said. That week, Hans's attorney received a letter, short, clear, and unwavering. All assets tied to Walter Schneider were under legal protection. Any unauthorized access or forgery would be met with prosecution. Hans responded by email. No apology, just a question. "You're going to do this to your son?" I did not reply, because no, I wasn't doing anything to him. I was finally stopping what had been done to me. 3 days later, I went to a local veterans event at the town library. They were honoring those who had served in quiet wars. Operations the history books don't write about. I wore my old Navy jacket, polished my shoes, and shook hands with men who had also lost pieces of themselves in faraway places. At the reception, a young woman with a clipboard approached me. "Mr. Schneider," she said, "we're starting a legacy series. Would you be willing to record your story?" I hesitated, then said, "Only if I can tell the truth. Not the version with medals, but the one with silence." She nodded. "That's exactly the version we want." 2 weeks later, I sat in a quiet room with a microphone in front of me and began to speak. Not about battles overseas, but the battles we fight in kitchens, in bank offices, in driveways where no one picks you up. I spoke about what it means to be erased in your own family and still find the courage to stand. The recording went viral in the veterans community, and a segment aired on local television. Lena watched it 3 times. "You looked like you were finally breathing," she said. And maybe I was. Then came another invitation, a real one this time. Not from Hans, but from a former student of mine, now a professor. "We're holding a conference on generational legacy at Reed College. Would you speak? Not as a veteran, but as a father who chose dignity over dependency." I almost declined, but Lena nudged me. "Dad, if even 5 people hear your story and decide to reclaim their peace, it matters." So I went. I stood at a podium in a room full of strangers. I told them what I had done, what I hadn't done, and what I chose not to carry anymore. The applause was not loud, but it was honest. One man came up to me afterward. He was in his mid-50s, with tired but kind eyes. "You said something about the ledger of kindness," he said. "I've kept one too. Thought I was the only one." I smiled. "We're everywhere. We're just quiet." Hans did not show up at that event. But a week later, I received another envelope. No return address. Inside was a photo of us. Hans at age 6, sitting on my shoulders, his arms stretched out like wings. No note, just the photo. I placed it on the shelf. Not as a bridge. Not yet. But not as a final goodbye, either. Somewhere in between. The next season came slowly. I planted tomatoes in pots on the balcony. I started writing letters to people I had lost touch with, not to open old wounds, but to remind them that they mattered to me once. And that still counts for something. I gave away my old drafting table to a local high school student who loved engineering. "You'll outgrow it," I told him, "but you'll never forget the feeling of making something real." Lena began calling every Sunday. No agenda, just presence. And one morning, as the light stretched long across my living room floor, I realized something. I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. Not a call, not redemption, not even justice. I was simply living. And in that stillness, I found a kind of peace that was louder than applause. Then the last letter arrived. This time, not from Hans, but from one of the twins, Lily, written in careful block letters. "Grandpa, I miss you. Mommy says I'll understand more when I'm older. But I understand this. I liked your hugs. I liked your pancakes. I liked your laugh. Please don't forget me." I read it twice. Then again. Then again. I sat with it for a long time. That afternoon, I wrote her back. "Dear Lily, I won't forget. I never could. Grown-ups get things wrong sometimes. But love doesn't forget. Not ever. I'll always be here. Not with gifts, but with stories. If you want to hear them someday, just ask. Grandpa." I didn't send it yet. I sealed it. I placed it in the same drawer as the letter to Hans. One drawer, 2 letters, 2 futures. Both are still open. That night, I sat in that chair again, back in my own house, back where things had started. The photo was hung. The letter was folded in the drawer. The war was over. And the silence, it was finally mine.